seems like sort of more loosey-goosey vibe.
I think so.
No.
I think so. Okay, folks, welcome back from our dinner break. Thanks for awesome participation today. I want to recap a couple of my favorite lessons learned. I think that I'm aware that Katrina is inspirational and a great dancer and a crowd favorite, and I just want to reflect some more gratitude your way. I learned about the carbon footprint of some burial options, and I learned a new ranking for being eaten by wolves. New and inspired about that. And I also now know that I know someone who has composted 6 million chickens. And I wasn't aware that I had anyone in my circle with that skill before today. Yeah. You only need one. That's a great point, Lynn. That is a great point. The day that I need help with more than 6 million chickens, I'm going home early that day. Well, we're back, and this is another highlight of the event. We have. I'm going to introduce Caitlin, who I think in this room probably doesn't need a great big introduction. When I was exploring getting into death care, a dear friend of mine, Marla, who's here joining us this evening, said to me, based on the stage that you're in and based on the questions you're asking, I recommend that you go devour everything Caitlin Doughty has ever written, watch the podcast. And I grew a mile in my own inspiration and in my own education about what could be in this industry. And it's because Caitlin has such a profound voice and an entertaining style at delivering something that challenges us all, challenges us to advocate for choice, challenges us to think outside of the coffin, and really delivers a message in a way that I think causes us to rethink and question our own beliefs. And so I couldn't be more thrilled that Caitlin accepted our invitation to participate in the Body Composting Conference. And if you would, please help me to welcome Caitlin. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. What if after that very nice introduction, I was just like, hi, everyone. Hey, yeah, we're doing some composting. First of all, I want to say that several of you very nicely and kindly said to Katrina and I today, thank you so much for putting on this conference. We did not put on this conference. I want to thank The Natural Funeral, everyone there, and Seth. Having put on conferences myself in the past, I wouldn't recommend it. It's really hard. It's incredibly hard. And the fact that you rolled out the red carpet and we essentially just had to show up and it was brilliantly curated is just awesome. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. So the format of this is I have a few questions that I want to share with Caitlin. I think that are representative of maybe some common questions that we have in the room. And then I want to invite those of us here to contribute a couple of questions. And I've previously received a few questions from the online community who's joining us from around the world. And so we think we're on the right track. The Natural Funeral, Return Home, Recompose Earth, right? That have this sort of centric focus on this emerging technology. How do you reflect? Are we on the right track? And is there anything that you'd like to challenge those of us who are in the NOR fan club to do more of?
No, not on the right track at all. This is your come to Jesus moment. No, of course you're on the right track. We're having a conference. This is so exciting. When we were having lunch yesterday, we were reflecting on this, or I was reflecting on this, the fact that I've been doing this work for about 15 years now. Not composting, obviously, but this work in this space for 15 years. And at the beginning, I obviously stood on the shoulders of green burial pioneers, and home funeral pioneers. But since I was also in the funeral industry, I kind of felt like I had not a lot of allies at all. I felt a little bit like a lone wolf, not the ones that are going to eat you, but just a lone one. And here I was sitting at this lunch table with all the NOR operators, and it was just like, just a bunch of people like me having lunch, talking body composting. And what a radical shift that is from just 10 years ago, from 5 years ago. And I think that we've said it a bunch of times today already, but it cannot be overstated how quickly this has all gone. If you're a student of the American funeral industry like I am, the number one thing about the funeral industry is how glacially slow it is to change. And how cremation, Jessica Mitford wrote The American Way of Death in 1963. It was a huge, huge smash, #1 bestseller, and it said, just have a simple direct cremation. And yet it wasn't even until the 80s and 90s when cremation started to rise in numbers. So the level of public interest and excitement that we're seeing today and how kickstarted this is, it's very inspiring. All the new people who are coming at this from a heart-centric place. I don't usually say things like heart-centric, but when I'm with Seth, I just comes out. I'm like, that's my new character. But it's super inspiring, and absolutely it's on the right track. And yeah, it's a good time to be in death.
It feels like there's a great importance in how we talk about NOR. And that can be in a microcosm of a family, perhaps, because I know that in the funeral industry, sometimes we can have a whole family that's on track with a certain plan, and the cousin from Topeka comes in and changes everything and says, oh, this doesn't fit with the plans, or that's not what the person would have wanted. How would you recommend, starting with the family unit, let's say, how might you recommend talking with people who don't see the angle that we see here, and maybe this is somehow offensive or off-putting to them? Is there some language that you would use?
Well, I used to say that there's no such thing as a surprise home funeral, and I still think that's true, and I think we're still at the point where there's no such thing as a surprise composting. Like, it's not like your father is going to die at the hospital and the nurse is going to go, yeah, you could do a cremation or go to a local funeral home, or have you considered composting? And they've never heard of it before, and they're like, yeah, let's go do that the next day. That's not it's probably happening sometimes, but very rarely at this point. It's definitely a pre-education and getting people comfortable with it early. And something that I'm thinking a lot about now, and this really goes with working to legalize composting, is how do you talk to people who maybe have a different perspective about environmentalism than you do? Because let's be honest, I think a lot of us in this room really connect with and count on the environmental aspect of this work to convince people that it's a good thing to do. But you're going to have some people who are like, they won't say, I don't care about the earth, but they may say, I don't care about climate change, or I don't believe in climate change, or it's just not something that resonates with me. And how do you have that conversation? And what we've kind of come to is focusing on the idea of choice, and focusing on the idea of the fact that there's really strict regulations around funerals and what we can do with our own bodies in most states, except Colorado, where you just do whatever you want. It seems like. Today, when you were like, and then, someone just wanted a pyre, an open air pyre, so we just built him a pyre. And wasn't that magical? And why aren't we all doing that when asked? I'm just like, Seth. Anyway, back to people and composting. I think that there is a way that even people, you can really get into sort of their libertarian ethos, let's say. And in Texas, we're trying to do this now, and the slogan is, live free, die free, Texas. And now, is that what we do? Live free, die free, like Oregon? Probably not. or maybe for parts of Oregon. But there really is that's sort of how you might talk about it in Texas for all the farmers or all the people with big pieces of land who are like, wait a second, why can't I just bury my body on the land? Why is the government telling me I have to go through this funeral home and like lie down on some silk and pay $15,000? They don't want that either. So there's this beautiful overlap that has always existed between the libertarians and the Green Death people that I think is kind of our key to continuing to move forward with making composting work for everyone. Which is to say that not everyone is going to be deeply moved by the environmental aspect, but I think they are going to be moved by, let me make my own choices for my own body. They may be connected to their own land in a way that they don't see it as environmentalism, but they do see it as, you know, real connection to where they're from and where they grew up. And there are ways to do it that aren't maybe the first round, or for, you had on the slide today, like the early adopters, but we gotta jack that up and take it to the sky and get everyone involved in this.
Wonderful. That is a wonderful advice for helping to tap into maybe the emotional component of family members. Maybe some are going to be more environmentally inclined, some more pro-choice inclined. What about rallying as a group to help the states that aren't as forward-thinking as Colorado? And I got to share with you, I don't know if you know, Colorado has a festival this weekend called the Frozen Dead Guy Days, and the natural funeral and Gail with a good goodbye are we're like that's right. But it's basically a celebration of Colorado's acceptance of radical disposition methods. And Grandpa Brito from Norway is frozen in a tough shed where he's been for decades, and that he's kept at sub-zero temperatures by a team of people who tend to his care, because being permanently frozen is another option for Coloradans. We haven't been asked for that yet.
Surprise, surprise.
We've been asked for a lot of things, but no one has approached us with that just yet. And so,
it's just like we could do it.
Yes. That's right. So my question is, does anybody in the room want to sign up or pre-plant?
What's our name? Is it like pre-icing? Pre-freezing?
I don't know.
We'll crowdsource this later.
Thank you. So I sort of got sidetracked in the glory of all of these choices. But what I want to rewind my brain back to is, how do we as a group help the states that don't have this? I know on an individual level we can tap into the emotion of people. How do we tap into a congressperson who we'd like to suggest maybe sponsors something like this for their constituency?
I mean, I think the fascinating part is we don't know yet. We were talking about this earlier today, this is not something that most of the people involved in this have ever done before. Maybe in some states there are lobbyists that we work with. In some states we do not work with lobbyists, which is a whole nother adventure. But this is something we are kind of learning as we go along. And that's why Texas is such a fascinating challenge, because what we've done in California, what we've done in Washington, what we've done in New York is not going to work the same way as Texas. And honestly, I think we have a better chance in Texas than some other states, because in Texas, at least we can tap into that freedom argument. But in many cases, we're going to continue to run into the two problems we've had so far, which are the Catholics and the funeral directors. And, you know, God bless them, quite literally the Catholics, God bless them. But they have a real sense of what is respectful, which I think everyone in this room really bristles at. The idea that any one disposition can be ranked. It can be ranked on carbon sequestration, but it can't be ranked on respect. And I think that's part of the argument. is letting people know, first of all, that people really want this. And that is what we have been effective at doing so far, is letting people know just by sheer numbers from constituents that, hey, you're a senator, you've never heard of this, you might think it's a little weird. Oh, I got 400 letters that are all well written and sincere from people who want this. Like, they don't get that kind of letters. They don't get that kind of response for like the radio frequency bill or, whatever was on their desk that week. So if they hear something and they're interested, and usually, honestly, it takes a sponsor who's pretty passionate about it, who, shepherds the bill through. But other than that, I think it's really going to be about people and culture showing these states that it's almost a little embarrassing to not have it. That it's embarrassing for practitioners in funeral homes in that state to have to send the body across the border or fly the body somewhere because people don't have rights in their state.
Thank you. I'm going to challenge you with a hard question next, and it's hard because you just said that you can't rank a disposition method by its respectfulness. And I'm going to read you a verbatim question that I got from a French associate named Pierre Berneur, who is with the group Homo sapiens, which is a French group which is exploring the prospect of legalizing this in France. And he said,
so like Humus sapiens.
Humu sapiens. Yes.
That's cool.
and he quoted French law, which says the body must be treated with respect and dignity and decency. And then the specific question was, how do we describe that a disposition can be respectful, especially by comparison to other dispositions or standing on its own merit?
Well, I mean, as far as ranking disposition methods as respectful or not respectful, I would say that there are certain things that maybe would actually rank as less or more disrespectful, such as how we don't have any financial help for people who die, especially in this country, and how we take the bodies away from their loved ones, and if they want the state to help, they never get to see that body again. That's disrespectful. In all of human history, there has never been evidence of a culture that throws away their dead. Ever. There are some situations where they would like put them off a cliff or put them to be eaten by hyenas or animals, but then when you dig deeper, there's always a very spiritual or specific reason that they do that. So even death disposition methods that look a little strange to us or feel a little strange usually have some very sincere reason behind them. And so I don't know if you make that argument to say a French lawmaker, they'll have to work on that, but there's not really been a disposition method other than taking your body and cremating it and dumping the ashes in a mass burial pit in, say, South Los Angeles, that has been disrespectful in that way, because families always want to do the right thing for their bodies. And, in France, big Catholic country, and they're probably going to run into a lot of the same opposition that we have in some of our states. And, let's talk. Maybe I have some tips that have worked there.
Yeah. How do people connect with you? I know from working with you yesterday in some meetings that you are a resource of information. Can you tell, especially our people joining us remotely, where do you reposit information? How should people stay in touch with you?
Well, we are working right now on a really large legalization section on orderofthegooddeath.com. We've been doing so much legalization stuff that we've had to see how it ranks in a 501c3, because you're not allowed to do that much political activism. We're like, okay, we gotta move this up and this back. But that's really become a thing that people want us to do. And because we have followers, we're able to get out the push for those 400 letters to a specific senator on the health committee who's like, I don't get it. And if you have that holdout, if you can get a bunch of people to talk to them, all the better. So I think orderofthegooddeath.com, in probably the coming weeks to a month, we will have a much better, just clearer section for you of the different states, what legalization, and we actually had a great conversation yesterday with all the different operators about how we can hopefully come together and work on legalization going forward, because this is what most people in most states say is, this sounds so lovely, when can we have it? And the answer is you can't have it until it's legal, because that's how the American death system works.
What else is out there that as you have traveled the world and written about death in different cultures and what's emerging around the world, is there anything else out there that you're tracking that's interesting that people would want to know about?
They brought a beautiful tea set up here that I just feel compelled to take advantage of. People are tracking this. I was just at, I have to put it down now, unfortunately. I could try and integrate it into the bit, but I was just in Australia at the University of Melbourne for a Future of Death conference with all the fun Australians. And there was so much going on there. There's all sorts of, aquamation stuff and, medical aid in dying laws and all this interesting stuff going on. And what was everybody talking about at this conference but human composting? And they all wanted to know the exact same things that most of us want to know. When can we have it? How can we have it? How can we legalize it? So there's interesting things going on. There's interesting technology happening in Japan, for instance. There's interesting laws and things, but this is it right now. This is the big thing. And as you said, you got questions from all over the world. This is what people want.
Wonderful. Speaking of what people want, I would love to sort of prime the audience and allow anyone who has something that's stirring on your heart to maybe formulate that question, and please raise your hand. There's some folks around who are going to pass microphones, and I want to share with you a little bit about this tea set. This came straight from the Natural Funeral, which came straight from my mother, and I was raised with this tea set in my house, and my mother was raised with this tea set in my grandmother's house. And so it felt a natural extension when I got to the funeral home that we serve all of our customers on Grand Mary's tea set. And I'm delighted now to share it
and
with
no
you.
One's broken a teacup yet?
Well, we have a lot of them.
This is good to know, because now this is a high pressure situation.
You feel free to go pinky up. You're A-okay.
I live on the edge. I live on the edge. Yeah, there you go.
There I am. I came from the conventional funeral world, and I joined the Natural Funeral about a year and 3 or 4 months ago now. I found my tribe, but I just want to say thank you. I found you as well several years ago working in the conventional funeral world on YouTube, I think it maybe was, and I said, look at this girl. She is explaining things that we do in the funeral profession in a way that is fun and humorous and providing people information about things that a lot of people have no idea what goes on behind those doors. And I've seen it, I've done it, but thank you for your sense of humor and your presentation. And are you still working as a funeral director?
Thank you so much. Isn't it nice on this side of things? Isn't it just lovely to live in your ethics in this way? It's just so fun. So what had happened was, as the kids say, is that I owned a funeral home in Los Angeles, and I was talking about this yesterday. There's a couple things that made me want to leave California and move to the East Coast. The first is that after being able to work on legalization of aquamation, and then being lucky enough to work on legalization in California for composting, and owning funeral homes and working my whole 15-year career in California, I felt like I understood what California was as an industry and what it had to offer. And the other thing is we were one of the funeral homes in California, in Los Angeles specifically, that was hit really hard by COVID at the beginning of 2021. And I was just really horrified by the absolute absence of our government and emergency management in that situation. And they basically indicated that it was an opportunity for me to make money as a funeral director if I brought in freezers. When I said, please, we need freezers, we're overwhelmed with dead bodies. And it was all just completely ignored. And then the governor came out and danced with some minions and said, California's open. Literal minions, literal giant blow-up minions. And it just made me, and I'm not like an I love big government, let's be real, but I just was a little disillusioned with California in general. So I am exploring new things on the East Coast now, and part of that was working with Katrina on New York for human composting there. And it's after 15 years of going pretty nonstop, this is a very strange time for me. And someone took over the funeral home and is doing awesome. But just kind of being in the moment and figuring out what's next is a very strange feeling, but I'm starting to enjoy it a lot.
Yes.
So no, I'm not working as a funeral director, which should probably make the funeral industry even more afraid.
Question, I guess our first new service that wasn't burial, let's call it 1960 or so, right? With that trend of cremation that took 50, 60 years to really gain a great deal of momentum. We then had alkaline hydrolysis, introduced whatever that was, 5, 10 years ago, and it's had a very gentle rise as well. And now we've got human composting, which seems, or at least the people here, we might be guilty of drinking the Kool-Aid, but it's, you know, it's stratospheric, it's amazing, it's gonna grow at leaps and bounds. Precedent doesn't really show that, and I'm just wondering what you think, and if you think it's really gonna explode, why?
Yeah, precedent doesn't show that at all. Yeah, and that's sort of exactly, I agree with you, that's what I was saying, is that this has not been what happens. And absolutely, to be negative Nancy here, what could happen is that the public could be absolutely fascinated by this. And something that I do think is a concern that I think about a lot is the fact that, you know, there are not a lot of people in this room who are 80 and over. There may be some of you, and welcome, but that's not usually the case. And we would get in these conversations, myself and other funeral homeowners, about this all the time, which is even stuff like home funerals and green burial. You had all this excitement on it, and we get calls day after day from people who are really interested. I want to plan my own funeral. I am 32. Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you sick? No. It's like, well, statistically, you're going to live another 50 years. And so is it going to be something like cremation, where everyone was very, very excited about cremation, and it was, you know, it was against the funeral industry, and you can't make us pay all this money, and then we'll die 40 years later and take advantage of it, and that's when cremation goes stratospheric. Could that happen with composting? Absolutely. But the only thing I will say is that alkaline hydrolysis did not get this kind of attention. Cremation got this attention, but it got this attention because it was the less expensive alternative to what people viewed as an exploitative industry, funeral industry. And often I think cremation is a default because what people are choosing is not the absolute magic of cremation. I mean, I suppose if you're Hindu or Buddhist and very connected with it, obviously, but they don't respond to the absolute magic and wonder of cremation. They respond to the fact that it's not expensive, they don't have to buy the fancy casket, they don't have to do all that. People are actually responding on a feeling level to composting, as you know, of course. They respond on a really deep feeling level. And for so long, our alternative to the funeral industrial complex has been, well, there's a cheap one, so that's good, right? Stick it to them. It's $1,000. And that's so important that that exists. Like, you know, very important that cremation exists for that reason. but it's not giving us the ritual that we obviously so desperately desire as a culture around death, and just to carry through our lives in a greater connection with nature and with ourselves. So that's why I have hope for it. That's why I hold out hope for it. And I think everyone in the room, our optimism is in that place. And, you know, again, did I expect to be at a human composting conference a year ago? No. This is great. So yeah, fingers crossed. We're all working on it, right? Hi.
Caitlin, as a fellow funeral director, I also enjoy making older funeral directors uncomfortable. Can you said that was kind of the second problem or the second barrier to natural organic reduction. Can you give some examples of some of what we're up against of the funeral director mindset? You know, with the traditional, we're not going to change anything, let alone a light bulb. But outside of that, what are some of the things you're hearing from funeral directors?
Well, okay, this is the one that I'm like, and we begin the monologue now for the next 30 minutes. I know you want cake, so I won't do that to you, but there's cake. Oh, there's cake. I saw them. There's like 3 cakes. They're big cakes. That wasn't a surprise. No, you said there was cake.
Oh,
we know there's cake. Okay.
Cake. You know there's cake.
Yeah. But what you didn't know is I'm going to burst out of the cake. So the issue, and this is why I wish Tanya Marsh was here. We're acting like she's dead. She's just at home in North Carolina.
Hi, Tanya.
But what she always describes and she's a law professor at Wake Forest, and what she always describes so beautifully is how the more traditional funeral industry has so much money invested, has their whole livelihood invested on funerals a very specific way. And she talks about it as like, if you have a buggy whip and you got the wheels for the buggy whip and the oil for the buggy whip and everything going for the buggy whip, and someone's like, I don't really want to use the buggy whip. You're like, you have to use the buggy whip. And the same thing for the sale of really quite expensive caskets, for embalming services, for chapel services, for the hearse, for the dove release, for whatever it is, the cemetery, the vault, everything. That's what the funeral industry in the United States, which is actually a fairly recent industry as compared to many other industries. It's really a early 20th century design. But it's been built up in the 20th century into the 21st century, having to offer those things and having to have everyone buy the full shablam of all of that. Otherwise, it's not economically viable. And so what you're seeing now is either corporate consolidation of funerals or old funeral directors that don't have anything to do with their funeral home. They can't sell it. They no longer have sons going into it and going to mortuary school. It's maybe in a rural area. They can't do enough cases, as we call them, a year. And they just go out of business. And Tanya also warns us about how there's going to be large areas of rural parts of the country where there's just no funeral home. Or you'll have to drive your body hundreds of miles to get someone to help you with your person. So it's pretty dire. And I forgot your original question. See, this is what happens when I start monologuing about the funeral industry. Oh, okay. Yes. So where do the attacks come from? The attacks come from there. Thank you. The attacks come from there in the sense that of course that makes them mad. Everything they have is built up in this. I mean, many of you know this. Funeral directors thought the main existential threat until like 3 years ago was cremation. And we're now like, tiptoeing around like 60%, right? You should have seen that coming earlier. So it's just really, all of this is so existentially threatening to them and their, not only their, and it's not just about money, it's also all of those things, all of those parts that they sell, they're very connected to. And if we come in and say, unfortunately, what we do say, which is like, you maybe kind of were doing it wrong. And like, isn't it, look at the magical stuff you can do that the family loves. And the funeral directors, these older funeral directors, may have said, heard many times, the body looks great. Or, oh, this was so moving. But they've never heard a family say, this was the most magical thing I've ever experienced. My grief has completely transformed in this space. I'm so moved by what is happening to my father, even thinking about what's happening to his body. They've never heard that. And they hear us, or they see someone like me flouncing in and being like, hey, isn't this magical? That's gonna make them upset, of course. And I get it. But if they're not willing to change and embrace these things that could make their family say those things to them, then what are we gonna do? You know, that's a great question though, thank you.
Looks like there's a question over here. And we have a couple mics that are available to float around. So
we had the handheld mic, but I stole it for me.
Hi, huge fan. One thing that I'm wondering about is one of my goals for the future is to create a charitable organization for people in need, especially low-income people. Where do you think specific needs can be addressed that can be addressed by, say, like a 501c3 that could be incorporated into a business so I could still make it my livelihood?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and it's something that I really struggle with. And in the early days of my funeral home, I had these kind of vague ideas of like, okay, it's gonna be like Tom's Shoes of cremation. If you buy a cremation, you get a cremation, you know, you're helping a low-income person with a cremation. And then I really started to learn more about how, if we do that, we're sort of sending the message that we continue to send in all areas of our lives, that the government just owes us nothing and is not responsible for it. And that, you know, if somebody dies, that it costs money to die no matter what, which is wild, right? It costs money to be dead. And because that's true, it's sort of, yes, we can tell the government that like, oh, I guess we'll just do a GoFundMe. We'll go into debt. We'll have this charity. And I'm not saying that that's not a good idea. But I think that I would, for you, want to see it paired with something that also continues to call state, local, and federal governments into account for, like, have that be part of, like, until we can get to this place where the actual people who should be helping us take care of this are, we have to do this now.
Instead of just the directing like specific families, helping out case-by-case basis, making sure that our government can be held more to account for its people.
Yeah, I mean, that's so tough because then it sounds like I'm telling you, like, those families you're talking about, screw them, you know? And I don't want to say that because you would change their lives if you were able to offer them direct financial support. I guess what I am saying is that as you help those individual families, maybe use your advocacy to show why it's quite messed up that it's necessary that you're doing that advocacy.
Absolutely,
that
thank
makes
you.
Sense.
And if anybody has any ideas, let me know. I'm easy to find.
Yeah. With the rainbow hair over here.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I work at a funeral home in Minnesota. And I'm wondering, so we're one of those kind of on the cusp places where we're hoping, it's one of the brown states where we're trying to get legislation put through. As a funeral home who's interested in this, without starting from scratch with R&D like the four providers up here, what do you think that looks like for funeral homes who want to start implementing it as soon as possible once legislation goes through? What does that look like, or what do you think would be best practices for that?
Well, I think it's a question as to whether or not the people here are going to start selling vessels and selling systems. I don't know. I have no insider information on any of that. Or I would be buying stock in that one. But I think it's a question of that. And yeah, I think it's a question of, are vessels going to be like crematories, cremation? if you want to buy an aquamation machine, or if you want, I mean, it's a sort of strange thing, right? Because what you have here are 4 composting operators with very unique brand identities. And like we saw it all day today, right? Very unique brand identities, very unique ways that they do things, ways that they interact with the public, ways that they have laying in ceremonies. And I think we were talking about this yesterday. That's very different than how aquamation or water cremation has built it, which was basically from the very beginning, we are manufacturers and we sell these machines to funeral homes. And, in some ways, people are more excited about composting. I mean, they are more excited about composting. And I think a lot of that comes from the early stories, like Katrina's story from the very beginning, and these super impactful narratives that came out of those individual things. But I think it is a very fair question to say, how does this grow beyond these first companies? And will another, big manufacturer come in and do it? We don't know that yet. And will they sell them directly to your funeral home? We don't know. But I think that eventually will. I know it will eventually happen, but I really do think that the way that it started with these very specific kind of beautiful stories and people who started from this very specific place has kickstarted it in a way that just being like, we're manufacturers and we have a machine that can turn you to compost. Does anyone want one? Would not have. Good luck. Any more questions from the gallery? Hi.
Hello, I'm Gail Rubin, and Caitlin, I want to salute your Ask a Mortician channel and how it has evolved over the years. I especially love your recent NOR Fox News hosts puzzling over the whole topic. That was brilliant. Your videos have evolved from frequent and short to more longer and involved, and I mean, you've put some real masterpieces out there on YouTube. What are your plans for your videos going forward?
Well, I gave away the funeral home. I'm giving away the YouTube channel. I'm going rogue. No, I'm not doing that. Also, thank you, Gail. It's so nice to see you. We've been doing this for years, haven't we? I think it's very interesting that you're asking that because, there are some people in this room, Katrina included, of course, who have just been in the trenches for a really long time doing this. I actually, in preparation for this, I don't know why this was the one thing that I thought was a good idea, but I watched a video from 2014 of you and I, Katrina, the first time I did an Ask a Mortician video about human composting. And a couple of things I noticed. The first thing was how young I looked. Just how beautiful. I had this long hair and just this just a beaming smile. Just so much hope for the world. And another thing that I said in the video, which is fascinating, is talking a little bit about the blowback of people. This was like total prototype, like Urban Death Project reactions at that point. And I was talking about how it would come together and how it would feel to have your father be soil and how these things would feel. And I said, the thing is, we don't know because we don't know what it would be like to have that kind of relationship with death. And now we do. And it seems great. It seems to be going really well. And so, I've been doing that for a really long time. And I think my passion now really is with longer form content. One, because in the pandemic, TikTok took off, and that's when I realized I was old now. And I can't do it. I can't watch it. It makes me crazy. I feel like a curmudgeon. I've tipped over some point of no return. And I think that especially all the advocacy being done in short form content is really important. And I wish I had it when I was younger. But I think now part of what I'm sort of drawn to is really longer form meditative things, maybe even writing another book, something that you have to sit with, and including myself to write it, and these longer videos. And yeah, maybe less people would watch them, but the ones who did would have an experience with me for 45 minutes, for an hour, and it wouldn't be scrolling. It would be, you know, some sort of relationship in that way. And that, I mean, it's so wild that we're at a point that I'm like, sitting for 45 minutes is meditating on your own mortality, because that sort of sitting we can't do anymore. So that's where it's going. And yeah, I mean, one thing I do know is that I'm staying in the trenches, you know, and where we've been and where a lot of you have been for a long time and where we will continue to be. Thank you.
Chris, what other?
Oh, sorry. I'll get you and then you, if that's okay. Thanks.
I'm curious what other states are on your radar?
Well, I mean, what was so fascinating about the meeting with operators yesterday, which they just let me tag along to, which was great. Thank you so much. But is that a lot of the operators have been working kind of independently on different things. So as Katrina was saying today, there are more states than we know about. Texas is obviously the big one for me. We know about Illinois, we know about Nevada, Massachusetts we've been hearing about, Maryland we've been hearing about. I think those are the main ones. Minnesota, New Mexico, Maine, all of them, all the states are on the radar. And that honestly is kind of the thing, is that all the states suddenly are on the radar. And we expect, the point of obviously started in Washington because it's where Katrina was located, but thinking about a California, thinking about a New York, what the idea was, like when you get these kind of like big charismatic megafauna states, you know, that have a lot of attention and press on them to adopt this, or at least legalize it, then the other states will follow. And then now they are, and we're like, oh, it's a great thing, but you know, I think we sort of weren't prepared for how quickly it's going. And that's why I think it's awesome that we're trying to, you know, create a little coalition where there can be like central information, probably on all the websites, to let you know where this is happening and when you can help, and when we need public support, and when we need testimony, and when we need all these things. So that is the plan, but I will say that we are probably slightly behind where we want to be, just because, as we just talked about, every state suddenly seems to be in play. Whereas before it was like like a Ken Burns documentary where he's like writing home to his mom, and it's like year 3 in California. Like, once again, the Governor Newsom has turned down the bill. And that's what it used to be like, but it's not like that anymore. So yes, I think very soon you'll see all the operators and the Order of the Good Death come out with better cohesive legalization information. Yes, hi.
My family had a vested interest in New York. My cousin wanted to be composted. So lots of people backed that and wrote letters and all that kind of stuff. I've read the bill, and I cannot for the life of me figure out how you get composted in New York. Because it sounds like you have to be a cemetery, you have to be a not-for-profit, they don't know where to put the compost. I mean, how does that work?
Ooh, that's a great question. And it's funny because like it's a little inside baseball, but not for this group, really. So there are states on the East Coast that have very specific things where, for example, cremations have to take place in cemeteries, or crematories have to be located in cemeteries. And it's been this way for a long time, and they don't really have a vision of how it could be different. And what we were specifically trying to do with the New York law was say, we don't want them in cemeteries. I mean, they could be in cemeteries, of course, but we want them also to be other places, as, you know, funeral homes want to do them, or other operators want to have them have NOR pods. Pods, that's not what you call them. It's a long day for everyone. Where do we want to put our pods? Who knows?
Somebody's going to call them that eventually.
Someone will call them a pod, yeah. And so what we did get out of the law is the language that it the soil had to go in a cemetery, which we were like, absolutely not. So that's gone. But what we have to do now is get Governor Hochul to switch the law, which she said she would do. Now, will that change? Possibly. But what she said she was going to do in this sort of ratification session coming up was expand it to include funeral directors or outside of cemeteries. And as you will not be surprised to learn, funeral directors very much want that. Cemetery Association very much does not want that because they want to keep the same sort of power that they have. What is a little disingenuous to me is the idea, statements from the cemeteries saying we want families to know they're protected by these nonprofit cemeteries, which is almost a nonsense phrase because nonprofit doesn't mean they don't make profit and there aren't people at the heads of them making obscene amounts of money. It's economic protectionism, as, surprise, so many things in the funeral industry are. So that is going to be, NOR is going to be available in New York. Will it be available in the way that people want it exactly? We're not sure yet, but that is the fight, and that is what the governor said she was going to do. So stay tuned. There may be more videos to come on this very issue. Hi.
Hello. Is there a reason in your mind that we should be pursuing federal legislative efforts as well?
I would love that. That's never really been on the table, I don't think. It's never been proposed to me as being possible to be on the table. Obviously, there's things with the funeral rule, and it's awesome that it's hopefully, knock on wood, being amended to make sure that funeral homes have prices on their websites. And so things can change at the federal level as far as consumer protection things or areas, but it's very, very difficult to impossible to get any sort of disposition legalization at the federal level. And as we said, there's certainly no money available for anyone, although they did it with the COVID relief bill. So surprise, they can do it. They choose not to. So I would hope that there's stuff like that will happen, especially around money and funding and support around death. But I doubt it will ever have anything to do with disposition specifically. Fingers crossed, though. They want to do a national human composting bill. Sign us up. That's the fun way to do it.
Do you have any thoughts about memorialization in the context of commingled remains?
You mean when they are taken to some sort of conservation land?
Right.
Specifically for you, Elliot, who works in conservation land. A small group of folks here, right? I think that we had a conversation when I was there about this, and we talked about the very real issue that comes up, I think, also in the case of green burial, which is certain groups. We had a really fantastic article, guest article written on our website about this, about how specifically green burial doesn't necessarily tend to the needs of, for example, Black Americans or Jewish Americans who maybe don't like the idea of just put me in a hole and I disappear forever, because that was their very lived reality for many years. And so many of us have incredible memorialization for our families going back generations and generations. And if, for example, you're a Black American, you probably are not immediately amenable to the idea of just your body is just compost. It just disappears into the earth and there's no memorialization because that wasn't an opportunity you were given. And maybe you want a headstone with your name on it and full description of who you were and to take up space in that way. And so I think that the question moving forward is going to be, how do we provide that experience? And how do we make this accessible to whatever group wants it? Or maybe wants the disposition, but maybe isn't totally comfortable with the idea of absolutely disappearing into the environment. in that way? And is there ways to memorialize them on the ground that they go into? I think we were talking about some sort of tree with plaques on it. So we know where they are, and they do take up that space, but it's still within, you know, the ethics and confines of what composting does for us. So I think that's a very exciting collaborative conversation to be at the forefront of. And I think especially the providers who work on these spaces, you know, because you're going to have families who are like, I'm here to grow a tree. Here's some compost, put me out there, put me to work right away. And that's all they want. That's truly all they want, is to like, put me in, coach. You know, that's what the person who died in the family wants. And then you're going to have people who say, wait a second, this is going to be kind of a complex memorial journey for me and memorialization journey for me. What is that going to look like? And that's the future of this, right? This is what we're involved in right now. And it's exciting stuff. So I don't have the perfect answer, but I know we're right in the middle of this. And it's a rich place to be. Thank you. If anybody is just like, I need cake and I can't do this anymore, you could start on the cake. I would not be offended. We've been going. It's a long day. You've been doing great. Hi.
Hi. So as like the industry changes and as the world changes, so does things like Hollywood. Like pandemic brings pandemic movies, and then I'm a big fan of your YouTube channel as well, and I know you did the My Girl video, which was great. But do you think as this grows and as the taboo grows and as things like Fox News picks up something like this, do you think like maybe that would also change like the way that Hollywood does movies around death and like that kind of thing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't even quite know yet how the pandemic will affect so many things. You know, there's, I think they've done a study on this recently. My understanding is that after the Civil War, there was this huge influx in spiritualism and people wanting to talk to the dead. And I think that they're already starting to see that now, or influx after the pandemic of people feeling they need to talk to the dead in some way. Things like composting, how will that show up in our media? I think it's going to be awesome when we see the first, you know, well, I wonder if there'll be like a Big Lebowski style scene, right? With, like a coffee can of compost and like, it blows in my face. You know, that's going to be so wild when we see that first scene in Hollywood, right? Yeah, the Haunted Mansion in Disney World where you usually scatter your cremated remains. They're like, why is there dirt in here today? How did that happen? Yeah, exactly. Or, you know, I mean, I would not be, this is not what I'm telling anybody to do. But for the Disney folks, I feel like you can hide soil in the planters a lot better than you could hide cremated remains. As you said earlier, there's not ash police, there's not like funeral police. Right, yeah, and they won't know their soil ever, probably. You didn't hear that from me though, Disneyland people. Yeah, I think that that is actually a really good point, is that other than like news about legalization and news about profiles of the providers and, you know, Fox News being like, what is this? We haven't seen it show up in media yet. And there will be a day where we just see a total casual human composting scene in a sitcom or in a movie. And that's when we'll... Actually, there was do you know the show High Maintenance on HBO? There's a scene in there where they talk about wanting to be composted, but it was not legal in New York at the time. I'd like to go back and amend that scene and be like, actually, you can totally do that, man. We'll get high and get you composted. It's a show about marijuana. I wouldn't just offer to get high with a random person. We are in Colorado, though. Yeah, how much time?
We probably have time for two more questions.
Two more questions.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yes.
Person with microphone has a question.
Yeah, good. Take your privilege.
That's right.
Speak up.
One thing that we do at the Natural Funeral that I find such a privilege is we get to educate the community about NOR and water cremation and all the other options. And I'm curious because I got asked this a couple weeks ago. I was doing a class at a community college and somebody said, what do we need to do what do we need to be, how do we need to be educated in order to do this? And so it's really a bigger question of how do you think education for funeral industry professionals is going to change as this becomes the norm? Because I didn't know how to answer it. I came from a conventional funeral world and background, and so my answer was different. But as soon as I said it, I thought, gosh, I don't think you need that necessarily, because there's a lot of different facets. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I mean, this is a really broad question about whether or not we need mortuary school in that world. I heard a couple, yeah. I see some other people are interested in asking that question. Yeah, I mean, mortuary school, just like, the buggy whip, mortuary school is predicated on embalming. I went to mortuary school even though I knew I wasn't going to be an embalmer, but that was just kind of my masochism and advocacy that made me want to do that. But that's really the point of mortuary schools. And they started as embalming colleges. That's what they're there for. And I think there are other things that you could argue that they do now and other services they provide. But I actually did a video on this, not on my channel, but with Carrie Northey, who also has a death care channel. And we were like, well, how would we redesign mortuary schools? And there are so many topics that aren't taught in mortuary school that would be extremely practical to create a turnkey funeral director that aren't there currently. And they also have this sort of strange interest in keeping it the same, but I don't really understand why that interest is there, because you think their interest would be to evolve to create mortuary schools that really fit with what the industry needs, especially since the industry needs a lot of people right now. And they need them fast. So maybe splitting up mortuary school into okay, if you need to be an embalmer, if that's your passion, if you want to be a restorative embalmer, there's a specific course that you can do, like the old embalming schools where you just go and it's this kind of Wild West learn to embalm thing. But then also there could be shorter courses Cana has for cremation certificates or for NOR certificates, because a part of the problem is regulation and barriers to entry in the funeral industry. And now funeral directors are being we can't hire everyone. It's yeah, you put all those barriers to entry into effect to keep people out of the industry, and now you can't find people. So as we move into a place where cremation is 60%, hopefully we can get NOR to 70%. Those percents don't work together, but we want to shoot it up. There's going to be different training and different ways that happens, and mortuary schools may have to split up certificate programs into different things, or you could bypass it altogether and do outside, trade association training, etc. But yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and I mean, he was saying that in the UK it's split up, and in a lot of the UK, kind of like Colorado, you can kind of show up and be like, I declare myself a funeral director, which is also great to me. I mean, my whenever I'm asked about what is my fantasy for the funeral service going forward, it's radically less regulation and barriers to entry for people to enter the funeral industry. But then once you're here, there's inspection. You can't just pile up bodies in the freezer. You can't overcharge families. You can't do these things. You got to be upstanding within our laws around the funeral industry. But if you're ready to show up and get certified and, small time certified and enter the funeral industry and take that oath to be a funeral director, you can be a funeral director. You can open a funeral home. Why not? Works in most other countries. Works in Colorado. We have one more.
I think there's one more over here.
Am I on? Mm-hmm. Hi. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the program chair of the Mortuary College here in Littleton.
Oh no, my words have come back to haunt me.
Here we go. I would caution you to speak less generally about mortuary schools. Okay? I can tell you our program is making incredible changes. There are some others out there that are doing the same. And to kind of answer your question a little bit, we're still married to embalming because states are requiring it for licensure. So we have to be careful and not say, it's the mortuary schools, it's the mortuary schools. We have to give the people what they need to become licensed in the states. So as long as our states are requiring that funeral directors also be embalmers, and some of them don't. There's some split states. Most of them still are dual license, so you have to be both, right? Until that's no longer the case, mortuary school is going to have to continue training embalmers so that they can go do that apprenticeship to become licensed. So in states where you have to be licensed, which is everywhere but here, you cannot become licensed without that part of it. So the thought that some of us have is that we would create a death studies major at a community college. I'm thinking about that with some other people. And embalming could be an elective. So if you want to go into funeral directing and embalming, become a licensed funeral director and embalmer, you have the ability to do that. If you want to work in other parts of death care that don't require that license, you can still get an education in a lot of different things that will be meaningful for you. So Caitlin's right, mortuary school started on embalming. It did. That's the facts. And we're still married to it because we have to be accredited, so our students can become licensed. So there's a lot to it. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is we want to change the way we're teaching mortuary school. A lot of us really do and are doing all we can to bring in new things and show new things and all of that. But until changes are made at the state level for requirements to work in this field, we can't change too terribly much. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of good points were made there. And I absolutely agree with you that the main problem is regulation at the state by state level. 100%. I would never in any situation say that like the mortuary schools are the problem and the states are just doing the best they can. But mortuary schools, because they came from that place of the embalming schools and the rise of the funeral industry in America, are all part of the vast regulatory regime that grew up around it. So, to dismantle part of it, you kind of have to dismantle all of it. Although I do hear absolutely from mortuary schools that are trying to do better. I also hear from mortuary schools where the students are like, I don't know what year we're in, but the stuff we're learning seems wildly irrelevant to the, so I hear about that, but then I also, hear from like cool mortuary schools, which it seems like you're a cool mortuary school that's like doing their best to integrate all of these things. But even, yes, I mean, the question becomes though, yes, you could be embalmed or have this embalming license in a certain way. Maybe you even need a funeral director's license in a certain way. But if we're going to almost, large majority cremation, maybe AH, maybe composting, what's the role of the funeral director? Which is also a question we need to be asking. Like, can you just be a really educated, excellent customer service person who helps someone get those things? So I really appreciate your points 100%. And Lord knows I want to stay on the good side of the cool funeral schools. I would not want to alienate you. So I absolutely hear you. That's good. Thank you so much.
I just want to close with a couple words.
What I did want to say is that, unfortunately, because of my schedule, I have to leave mid-morning tomorrow. So some of you had mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk really quick or do a book thing. Please get me tonight.
Wonderful. That's a great invitation. I want to share 2 reflections on closing, and then right before we have cake, there's one other gift we want to give you. Gift and cake goes well together. The things I want to, as I welcomed and thanked the folks for showing up today and recognize the diversity, there are 2 groups that I generally pay particularly close attention to with my gratitude. And they tend to be the families who have connected with this already and are sharing the story. Because when we talk about the change agents, it's great for us to say, us who are the companies who are selling these things, of course we want people to connect with them. And it's nice to share with you our story, so hopefully you can feel the humanity beneath the company. But the families, I believe, have a huge voice in actually shifting the needle. And so I always welcome them wholeheartedly to the conversation because we need that story. And the other group I want to salute is we invited the 52 accredited mortuary colleges to this event. And we said, come at any, we will do anything we can to have you attend. And 6 of them responded. And Faith, I'm so delighted that ACC responded the way that you did and had your students come and join us. And I want to recognize that in addition to the families telling the story, it's obviously the people who are devoting their professional careers to this who we need sharing that story too. So thank you to everybody, and especially those groups.
Did I come that hard for mortuary schools?
No,
Man.
no.
I went to mortuary school. Come on. No, I actually want to say that the families are a great point. In that, I say this always about home funerals, is that it has the like positivity or like, after, survey says rate of happiness afterwards of like puppies and chocolate. That it's just sort of people have such a good experience with it. And the same thing is happening with composting in many situations, right? And so though I'm dear friends with Katrina, I don't do this for like the companies. My job is supposedly to be a sort of a neutral party for this death care revolution and to promote the things that are really resonating with people. And so it's the family stories and these people's stories and how they come out of this and how they feel afterwards and how it changes our sense of ourselves as animals and as part of the natural cycle of things, which is the reason that we all continue to promote it, right?
Yes. So we have concluded the conversation portion of this evening. And we would like to present you, Caitlin, with an award. And this award is an induction into the Natural Funeral Hall of Fame for, yes.
Is that a tiny vessel?
This is a tiny chrysalis vessel which says, to Caitlin Doughty, in appreciation of your skill, wit, and uncanny ability to smash through barriers between us and a healthy view of death. And I'm going to let you have a surprise look inside. I want you to be startled later.
There's a little skeleton in green bedding material. This is a one-of-a-kind thing.
Oh, yes.
For sure. And I am extremely honored. And I hope that this is a thing that many other people will get.
That's right.
As we go along, because everyone in this room, someone in this room, are you inspired to earn this award for yourself? Yeah, continue to be doing good work and leading with your ethics and your heart and leading with what the families are telling you move them. And someday you too will have a tiny chrysalis vessel. This is very, very sweet. I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Wonderful. And then there was cake.
Cake.
Yes.
Let them eat cake.
Let them eat cake. We have 3 delicious cake varieties, 3 different flavors. They're all vegan, they're all gluten-free, and they're all delicious. And if I hadn't have told you those things, you wouldn't know. So please enjoy, and thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Caitlin. That was.
Oh wait, I gotta flip it. Sorry.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Here we go. And Madison.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh.
NFDA isn't giving out these.
No, no, no.